So welcome to the Pittsburgh Real Estate Panel. Today we're talking with real estate agent Tim Gyves. Since launch, Tim's always been a supporter of Selling Later's mission to give consumers time and transparency in real estate. So we knew he would be a perfect match for the panel. So Tim, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Yeah, so since we're talking about Pittsburgh, I'm asking everybody this. What is your favorite, most lovable, quirkiest thing about Pittsburgh that you won't hear or see in other cities? And so far, who I've interviewed, we've had Pittsburgh Left, the Parking Chair, Jagoff, and people that don't want to visit people in the north and the south because it's too far. So
because there's a bridge and a tunnel. Yeah,
right.
Those are ones that are definitely contenders. The quirkiest thing for me is that in this job in particular, everything is close. If you Google it, you're never really, I'm probably not 20 minutes away from where you live.
Right.
As far as Google says, it's like 7 miles or whatever. But depending on where you're going or how you're going, when you're going, 10 miles in any given direction could take 5 minutes, or it could take an hour, or it could take anywhere in between. And in part, it's because of the way the city and all the surrounding areas are laid out. I moved here from New York City, pretty straight grid. You make a couple of lefts and you're back where you started. In Pittsburgh, everything goes this way and that way. And so there is no straight shot to somewhere half the time. So that is something that takes a while to get used to, and takes a while to, if you grew up here, which I did not, it's sort of just taken for granted, but it still surprises me.
Right. And we give directions with landmarks when you're traveling too. We don't say go a mile, it's go up to the Dairy Queen and turn left and then turn right at the library. And you're like, I don't know what any of this stuff is, but okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Which, like, pre-GPS made total sense. Like, we moved here before, everybody had like a Garmin or whatever, like stuck to the front. And so getting around, it was very much directions, like you just said. We tried to go up to Seven Springs once from the city, and my father-in-law had written out directions like that. And it was like, make a left at Sarnelli's. And I was like, what's a Sarnelli's?
Yeah.
And we were just trying to, no landmarks in the typical way. But yeah, definitely. It's a local thing.
Right. So did you grow up in New York?
I was born there. I was born in Queens and grew up on Long Island, which is kind of not in New York City, but until I was about 9 or 10. And then we moved to Pennsylvania outside of Philadelphia. So I'm not from Pittsburgh, but my wife is from here in the South Hills, and we met in New York.
And now where do you live now? What part of Pittsburgh?
Now I live in Friendship, which is a little kind of historic neighborhood within the city of kind of big old Victorian houses that in their day were full of either single families or multi-generational families. And now some of them are chopped up into apartments and some of them are kind of restored single family ones. So,
all right. So living in Friendship in an effort to support small businesses in this time, favorite place to eat, favorite coffee shop, and favorite place to go either now or when we can actually go to places again.
Sure. Well, it's not the only reason we bought this house in Friendship, but I've sort of consciously always wanted to live where I could walk to a local coffee shop or something like that. It's a huge thing for me coming from New York. It's like, it's a quality of life thing that you may not think about initially, but literally 4 doors from my house is a place called Friendship Perk and Brew, which is a small business started by a guy whose family had owned the storefront for probably the last 40 years, and it had gone through several iterations. It was like a 7-Eleven that was kind of beat up and down and out for the college kids back in the day. And then it was closed for a long time. And he was born and raised in Friendship and said, this neighborhood needs a coffee shop, restaurant. And so he opened it up and he serves the locals. And I live close to West Penn Hospital. So you get a lot of the nurses and the doctors coming out from there. So that's a favorite kind of coffee shop / local place to eat. There's also a pizza place called Spack, which is right around the corner for me that, they were hit pretty hard. They were kind of shut down, but then opened up, figured out a way to do their masks takeout to go service, but they're on Penn Avenue and Garfield, kind of right around the corner. And then favorite place to go. One of the reasons I thought I could live here, coming from New York, was the first time I went to the Carnegie Museum and just kind of spent a couple hours in the art museum wandering around. It's a huge asset for the city neighborhoods. For people who don't live in the city, it's a reason to come in. You know, we have relatives who come in, and for them, it's, you have to make a whole day of it, because you're coming in from an hour or so away. For me, I could say, wow, let's have a meeting there in the cafe instead. And so it's just a nice place to, you know, as a member, be able to pop in. You know, they're a huge, huge asset to the city.
We're lucky. We have, you know, the Carnegie museums, you have like the Children's Museum, the National Aviary, you have Phipps. There's so many awesome.
So much stuff to do.
Right. It's like never ending. I can't wait to just be able to go back.
Again.
I used to spend so much time at the aviary. I'm sure it looks so different now because I've been
I think they renovated a little. Like all these places, you know, you're gonna go back and they're kind of gonna be with fresh eyes again. So
right, fresh new take. Okay, so what about your housing market? What is it like right now where you live?
So in the city, again, all of this is kind of bookended by the COVID stuff, but city market has been strong for a while, you know, steadily appreciating in most of the city neighborhoods. There are some outliers like Lawrenceville, which saw a huge increase, you know, in prices and things like that, and then it's cooled a little bit. Where I live in Friendship, for the longest time, there weren't houses on the market because you had people staying for generations. And so my own neighborhood has happily, you know, increased a little bit. And then a lot of the surrounding neighborhoods that maybe were a little more of an outlier in the city, you know, Stanton Heights, Morningside, you know, across the river, and, you know, Etna or Millvale. Basically, the idea that the places that were always popular, as they've gotten less affordable, people have considered the next ring out, which, you know, were always viable neighborhoods. They had just maybe been not on people's radar or a little sleepier. So for each neighborhood that is not affordable for a client anymore, I sort of say, hey, have you thought about the next ring out? You know, from Squirrel Hill to Greenfield, or from Lawrenceville to Etna or Shaler, or, you know, that kind of thing. So in general, it's busy. You know, the idea of multiple offers and things like that. If something is priced right, you know, and a seller goes in sort of, you know, knowing the market and knowing, you know, what the competition is, typically, if it's also in good condition, there's a lot of interest right away. So not everything is a bidding war. Some things stay on the market for quite a while, but in general, there's a lot of demand in the city. And a little bit further out as well. You know, the other agents you'll talk to have probably seen an influx of people from the city moving further out. You know, I have clients moving to Dormont, to Mount Lebanon, to Wexford, to Ross, kind of, who had previously been in the city and are just looking for a little more room.
It's like the second ring out, right, Ross?
Yeah, the second ring out. Yeah, where it's like you're still, most of those people will work in the city still, or many of them. But, you know, for some folks, that is just a preferred lifestyle, and I won't begrudge anyone it. And I will take clients anywhere. It's just sometimes it's new to them and it's new to me in terms of, it seems close, but it's actually, you know, quite a hike.
Right. If only we had the tea in the north, I feel like it would be so much more.
Well, that's the one thing I miss the most about New York, like the idea of, and public transit is getting better in the city, and for folks in the South Hills who have the tea, it's a huge selling point. But yeah, the reliance on cars in the Pittsburgh region can be kind of a drag, at least for someone not from here.
Right.
But,
so how exactly did you get into real estate once you moved here? Or did you do it in New York, or? No,
New York is sort of another whole animal, I think. It's sort of like, if you see the TV shows and stuff, I think it's probably a hard job in its own right, but there's a lot more involvement with lawyers on the kind of business end of things, and on the agent side of things, you know, you're showing new construction so often, stuff that doesn't exist, or apartments all over the place. So I was not a real estate agent in New York. My background was fundraising and marketing for nonprofits. So
Oh, awesome.
for about 10 years, I worked for arts and literary groups in New York. And actually, when we moved here, I was still working in the nonprofit sector. So I worked for WQED for a little bit and the Parks Conservancy for a short time. And about then is when the economy, say 2009, 8, sort of did this. And we were on our honeymoon in Italy in 2008 when kind of the market crashed and the housing bubble started. And I knew that the climate for fundraising and, you know, development was not gonna be so great. And eventually it wasn't. And in 2009, I guess, I got laid off, which made total sense. You know, groups could not support staff. And I sat for a couple of months saying, you know, am I burned out on nonprofits? It's probably not their fault. I still loved all these organizations. And I had never stopped looking at houses once we bought our first one. We lived in Point Breeze at the time, another East End neighborhood near the Frick and Frick Park. And I said, you know, what the heck? It's an interesting skill set that clearly, you know, nobody starts out with, but could easily be learned. And, you know, after about a year of kind of courses and licensing and deciding if it's what I wanted to do, you know, I started with Coldwell Banker. I'm in Squirrel Hill right now. So my office was right up the street. And now I'm with Remax in the East End about 10 years later now. So it's definitely a career pivot, but most people, I think if they're honest, do not start out saying, I'm going to go to school for real estate. It's either, you know, it's something people fall into for a variety of reasons. And for me, that was definitely it. But it was a good fit. It's kind of a mix of art and history and people skills and a little bit of psychology and a little bit of business and just knowing your city, knowing your neighborhoods,
Right.
which is what I've done kind of over the years.
So for the past 10 years, is there a type of home, type of buyer, seller that you end up working with the most? Is it just all over the map? Or is there something you enjoy the most?
It's a little bit all over the map. Like I said, I will start out in the city and end up in Wexford or Sewickley, you know, but so it's sort of, you know, as it should be, client driven. What I like the most are old houses and kind of the interesting architecture that is here that frankly didn't exist where I grew up. You know, in suburban Philly, it was like kind of split level 1950s boring kind of stuff. And in Pittsburgh, you know, we're fortunate to have, you know, I live in a 110-year-old Victorian house, and right outside now of like this crazy stone Tudor cottage that is being listed for rent soon. And then you have these mid-century houses, and then you have some totally custom new construction. I'm not sure, where are you up in the North Hills?
I'm in Franklin Park. So
okay, so
I'm in like
like
new construction central.
new
Pretty
construction,
much.
but there's a variety there too, as far
Right.
as like what's getting made, and it's not all like the whole McMansion kind of term that was thrown around years ago. Like there's such a range of new construction, and you know, kind of people having very much a hand in the house that they're building, you know, for themselves, and saying, oh, we need an in-law suite because we have an aging parent, or it's important that we have a home office. So so I've done everything from new construction to, you know, foreclosures and sheriff sales. But in general, I like spending time in the city the most.
Right.
And buyers and sellers as well. You know, new agents will typically, unless you're lucky and have sellers calling you to list their house, which if you're inexperienced, generally doesn't happen. Kind of getting a sense of the market with buyers, getting a sense of the neighborhoods with buyers, and then, you know, if it's a good relationship, that will eventually, a few years ago, turn into folks who are selling, folks who are buying a second home, folks who are referring you to different friends and things. So that's sort of how buyers become sellers, become relocators, become referral folks.
So what do you think is the biggest misconception that consumers have about agents?
I guess And I was probably guilty of this too, before I got into it. I guess the biggest misconception is, what we do is just show people houses and collect a check from a seller at the end of the day. Um, some people don't understand how the compensation model typically works and sort of what's involved. Buyers are typically not paying me at the end of the day. It's a seller's commission. So I guess the mechanics of how it works, but more importantly, the how much stuff, and this is important for them too. Like, we see 5 houses, we pick one, and from there until the time we close or don't close, like there's a ton of stuff that happens between then and the end.
Right.
With home inspectors, with lenders, with appraisers, and most importantly, I think with a lot of communication between my clients if they're buyers or my clients if they're sellers and the other side. Because it sort of starts all over again. You fall in love with this place. You either are thrilled that you got it because there were 5 other offers,
Right.
or you're nervous throughout, and then you have inspections, and all of a sudden you're like, why am I doing this? And it's sort of realizing that there is some work and some expertise involved, in part just because for most people it's the first time they've done it or the third time they've done it. Whereas, dozens of times a year, we're not only hundreds of times a year, we're in houses, dozens of times a year, we're guiding people through this transaction. And the stress level is real. And our job is sort of to be there to dilute it a little bit, in my experience.
Right. Okay. Without saying ask friends or family, where's the best place to search for an agent?
It's a tricky one because generally that's well, the point of asking friends and family is that you're getting more trusted stuff, trusted recommendations. So if you can't do that, I'm not a huge fan of online reviews for everything else in the world, like sneakers or does this jacket sized right, like that kind of thing. But when it comes to people who are looking for reviews online on like Zillow or Google, you will generally find positive ones from people. Like if somebody had a bad experience with me, they're probably not going to write a review anyway, unless they're going to go out of their way to write a negative one. But what you find in the people who write the reviews is kind of the nuances of what worked in the relationship.
What is the most important question to ask when interviewing an agent?
I think the best idea is to kind of get a sense of how they're going to be to work with, not when the sign goes up or when you're at the closing table, but that middle part. Like, how are they communication-wise? Their communication style is huge because that's going to affect not just how they talk to you, but also how they're talking to the other side, as well as just, like in quotes, their negotiation style. Are they shark steamroller types, or do they like to try to make a consensus sort of thing? Because the right answer to that question is going to depend on how a seller or a buyer is themselves. If somebody is very hard-nosed, kind of no nonsense, get to the point as a buyer or a seller, they might want an agent who represents that a little bit more. But if there's someone who doesn't like how those personalities come across on TV sometimes and realize like, oh, you're buying a house from this little old lady who really just wants to know that it's going to a nice new family, maybe a different personality type would be more to your benefit. So those are the most important things I've found, because it goes the same with clients as well. There are folks who are going to need one approach, and there are folks who want another approach.
Right. And then looking at the industry, what is one thing that you would like to see change in real estate?
Or improve. Technology. Yeah. Technology has been awesome, for the most part. When I bought in 2008, we bought on the basis of like 8 horrible photographs of the place and like not much of a description. So the ability to like see, 24 pictures of a place before you trudge out there is great. The 3D tours are great, but the technology end that makes every house look fantastic, like every picture just looking like, that can be overkill. And on the other side of things, from the business end, things like Zestimates and market values that are sort of smartly, algorithmically figured out. Sometimes they're spot on, and other times I can tell from your face now, like,
Yeah.
it's like my house is not worth $1.3 million because one down the street sold. Or, flip side, like my house is worth way more than
Right.
Zillow thinks.
I had a member
Or,
who didn't understand any of that, and they called me and said, why does Zillow think my house is worth, it was like 100,000 less? And I said, did you look? Because it doesn't even know how many bedrooms you have. It has no
right.
idea. Like, it's
Yeah.
blank. And
Yeah.
she's like, and where did this picture come from? There's a garbage can in front of it. I'm like, that's from Google. I go, nobody
Yeah.
took that picture.
Yeah. The
That's
old
just
tax record. Yeah. So the data, there's so much data now, but depending on how good the data is or how bad the data is, it can sort of skew understandings. And like what you mentioned just there, if a seller goes on to Zillow and updates their own home facts, and says, well, you know what, it's not 3 bedrooms anymore. We now have 4, or we've added a bathroom, or renovations were done 5 years ago. Just tweaking that a little bit, and it shows how the algorithm can be kind of messed with. You know, they'll see a value change, that Zestimate change, that for all intents and purposes can be inflated or deflated. But if they're putting in better info, they may get a better Zestimate. And
right.
I don't know if all the companies work that way, but so that's consumers are trusting these sites because they're right there, while you're flipping through at night and you're seeing all these places. You're trusting them for the good stuff, like the 3D tours and the access to all the pictures. But the other part of it is a little tough. And then my other complaint about sites online, and this is agents are as much a part of this as the tech companies, is when you see somebody online and you're like, for more information, click. And who are you clicking? Am I clicking Wendy, the mortgage broker, so that she'll
Right.
try to sell me a mortgage? Am I clicking somebody who's paid for placement up at the top, who's just paying? I mean, I could spend tens of thousands of dollars a year trying to get leads from people who, for all intents and purposes, don't know that I'm paying to try to get them. So that part is a lot of like, am I chasing my tail trying to get new clients, or people who are clicking that link getting info from the listing agent or from just some random person? So that part, it would be nice to have that explained a little more so people knew. And the same with like
platforms.
yeah, the referral platforms. And if you're clicking to like get an estimate as a seller, like what could my home be worth? Like, are you ready to then be deluged with like everybody? And the whole reason your platform exists is because there are other ways to do it.
Right.
And not everyone is looking to have like the top listing agent in their neighborhood come out and dazzle them and say your home is worth whatever.
Right. What's funny is what I've learned is that like there's a core group of really good agents that don't play the referral games. They don't do the heavy expensive marketing. They're not doing the look at me billboards, because in Wexford there's like 4 or 5 agents that buy the $8,000 billboard to showcase
I don't
themselves.
need to be that big.
Right.
I don't need a 20-foot version of me.
Right. And so there's that core group of really good agents. And I think that's part of the reason of having this panel is you've got tons of experience, you've got really great clients, you have, consumer forward thinking attitudes. But you're just not easy to find sometimes because everybody is in your face trying to connect you with a great agent. And it's not necessarily a great agent. It's not the best agent. It's just a lot
or
of
the
it.
best fit, or the
Right,
best fit
right,
for you.
right. It's those websites are who's going to pay the most money,
Right.
to get your information. And that's
Right.
maybe at times that might work out for you, but most of the time it's not necessarily the best agent. So that,
Yeah.
that's part of why I think it's nice to have this panel, is that people can ask you questions and there's nothing of that nature going on behind the
Right.
scenes.
No expectation. Yeah. And a big part of, your whole reason for existing is not everyone is looking to sell tomorrow. And if you call an agent over to your house, they're really hoping you're going to list like
Right,
tomorrow.
right.
And that's not what makes sense for so many people. I spent probably with my parents' sale and then other friends who were kind of longer term, the better part of a year, like kind of thinking about what needs to be done, what's your time frame, various things to kind of get a place ready. And if in the time that allows a seller to kind of talk to folks, which is I think in part what your platform does, without the pressure of like sell to me,
Right, right.
list with me. That's really helpful because I'll tell you, if my parents had to like list their house and sell it tomorrow, it would not have gone well.
Right.
The kind of the logistics and the psychological stuff and just the getting a house ready on your own timetable will let you have a much less stressful experience and probably a
Right.
much better sale. And sometimes, it's like you find somebody who wasn't planning on moving or wasn't planning on listing, and those sort of relationships can be great.
Mhm.
Where I just helped my babysitter buy a house from her husband's like childhood friend's mom. And
Oh,
she was not interested in listing it at all.
right,
And we're like, okay, you let us know when you're ready and stay in touch. That kind of start of a conversation,
right,
and we closed on that house and they got the house they wanted. And I listed the house that they were selling, and it was like win-win all
right,
around.
right.
So it doesn't always have to be like, you know, everybody's in it for a killing.
Right. And it's hard because I think with how quickly things are selling in most places, that's kind of used against you, like why people don't really want to say right now, I'm interested in selling. Can I talk to you about later to an agent?
Mm,
Because they don't want to feel that pressure. Well, you should really list it right now because who knows what's going to happen next year.
yeah,
And maybe that might be the case, but if you're not ready, you're not ready. Where are you going to go? If you're
yeah.
building a home.
E- exactly. Or if you're listing now and you're not ready, you're not going to get the kind of price that you could get if you. I'm sure you're going to talk to some like stagers and some home repair folks where taking your time and doing some basic stuff. Like my parents did a whole bunch of stuff to get it ready, and because they did that, it sold.
Right.
You know, so yeah, I like your idea of um, meeting people kind of where they're at, so that they realize there are other options out there than. And we didn't even talk about the whole like for sale by owner model where
Right.
it's
Right.
like somebody just sticks a sign in the yard, but they haven't done the sort of stuff that I would do or that the other folks you're going to talk to would recommend, because they see a neighbor's house sell
Right.
for
Right.
600. So
Right. Or
the
know
kind
what's
of
going to happen after you get that offer and all the stuff that
exact
happens after the fact.
exactly, yeah. And that's the other thing. It's like just being that in between person,
Mhm.
that's the real value I've found. Because even when selling my own house, there was a reason why I was an intermediary between my wife and the
Right.
agent on the other side and the seller on the other side.
Right.
Because if everybody's in the room together, even if they're friends and family, it can get,
Well, it's
a little
awkward.
dicey.
I mean, we're
Yeah,
talking about the biggest purchase of your life, most likely, and that's
yeah,
uncomfortable.
yeah,
It's awkward.
yeah.
It's
Because
awkward.
somebody's walking away with a big check and somebody else is, you
Walking
know,
away with a
ner-
big payment.
a big payment, or they're nervous about the house, or they're very sad to leave the house. So, um, there's a whole bunch of ways to do it.
Right. Right.
But it's been kind of a fun way to be involved with people through the process. Yeah, I
Right.
was thinking about people having their first Thanksgivings, yesterday. I was like, oh, well, these guys, they finally moved in, and these folks probably have ripped out their kitchen and
Right,
maybe
right.
are eating somewhere
Different.
else. But so yeah, it's definitely an interesting line of work, and
Yeah,
it's good that you're giving folks some other possibilities too to consider, because
yeah,
the model definitely, I don't know if it's broken, but it could use a whole lot of fixing and tweaks. And there are some things that definitely are broken just in
right.
terms of
And
how
it
people,
seems like what people are building is offering convenience in some aspects, but it's just taking away from the other financial pieces of it, whether it be, dipping more into commissions that's giving out to other
Mhm.
companies, or, the convenience of having a company buy your old home while you buy a new one. And
Right,
then, there's costs involved in that, and there's
definitely.
transactional fees and overage. So,
Yeah,
like there has to be at some point a easier, fair, less expensive way, at this point
yeah,
free for us. So, it's just a matter of building it. So, because
yeah.
building a
No,
startup's really, really
yeah,
hard.
I could not, but you're there because you're filling a need that is, several aspects of what you just described, they totally work for some folks. Like if
Right,
it's a relocation, you want some company to buy that house so you don't have to worry about it. But for most
right,
people, that doesn't make sense. So, and some of the discount brokers and some of the, pay to be on the MLS, but then don't get any of the support.
hmm,
It would be interesting if you had folks who, um, sort of have gone through it on their own, and then the kind of reliance on attorneys or title companies to kind of help them walk through the
right,
basics, because it
right,
can be done, it happens all the time.
right,
It's just not getting surprised
right,
um, when those half dozen questions come up.
right. It's just more work. But if
Yeah,
you're willing to take it on, then it's worth it for you.
yeah, and at any price point, a commission, whether it's 3% just paying one side or 6% paying both, like that's thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars. So
Right,
for some folks, it just makes more sense to kind of go another route, and nobody's gonna begrudge you that.
right.